This happened on New Year's Eve a few years ago. I remember it clearly because it was supposed to be one of the most relaxing nights of my life. My roommates had been invited to a massive house party across town, and they'd tried their best to drag me along, but I just wasn't feeling it. I had just wrapped up a literal brutal week at work, and all I wanted was a quiet night in. A few beers, some junk food, and watching the ball drop on TV. That was my idea of a perfect New Year's. They left around 8 p.m., all dressed up and excited. I told them to have fun and not do anything stupid. Once they were gone, the house felt incredibly peaceful. I'm the type who really values that kind of silence, so I made myself comfortable on the couch, turned on the TV, and cracked open a cold one. Things were going exactly as planned. The only annoying part was the neighborhood. People had been setting off fireworks since sundown. Every few minutes there was a loud bang or a whistle somewhere nearby. I'm not the type to complain about that stuff. It's New Year's Eve after all. But after a couple of hours, the constant noise started to get on my nerves. I turned up the TV volume and tried my best to ignore it. By 11:30 p.m., the fireworks had gotten even crazier. It sounded like a literal war zone outside. I remember thinking some of these people had to be drunk out of their minds, because the bangs were constant now, overlapping each other. I was just settling in for the pre-countdown coverage when it happened. Around 11:50 p.m., I heard a loud smash coming from the back of the house. It was different from the fireworks, sharper, closer, and much more metallic. I muted the TV and listened, but there was nothing but the muffled booms from outside. I figured one of the neighbors had launched a bottle rocket that went sideways and hit my back window. It wouldn't be the first time something like that happened in this neighborhood. Idiots, I thought. I was more annoyed than anything else. I wasn't scared at all. I was already mentally calculating how much it would cost me to fix the glass. I got up from the couch and walked toward the kitchen. The back door has a big glass pane in it, and I was fully expecting to see a small hole or a crack. What I saw was much worse. The entire glass panel was completely shattered. Pieces of it were scattered all over the kitchen floor, glittering like ice under the light. A cold draft hit my face immediately. The winter air was rushing in through the empty frame. I stood there for a second, totally confused. If a firework had done this, where was the debris? There was no burnt paper, no smell of sulfur, nothing. Just broken glass and that biting cold air. Something felt off. My brain was desperately trying to make sense of it when I looked down at the floor. That's when I saw them. Wet footprints. They were muddy with bits of fresh snow mixed in, and they were leading away from the broken door, across the kitchen tile and straight into the hallway. The exact same hallway I had just walked through to get there. My heart literally dropped into my stomach. I felt this cold wave wash over me that had absolutely nothing to do with the draft. Someone had broken in. Someone had clearly used the sound of the fireworks to cover the noise of the glass breaking. And they were inside the house right now, somewhere behind me. I remember just freezing up. I couldn't even force myself to breathe. Then, the TV in the living room suddenly blasted again. I must have sat on the remote before I got up, and the volume just lagged. It was honestly the weirdest, most surreal feeling, hearing all those people on screen cheering while I was standing there paralyzed. And then, right under the noise of the crowd, I heard that specific creak of the floorboard. It was directly behind me. I knew exactly where that spot was in the hall. It was way too close. I didn't turn around. I don't know why. But something in my gut told me that if I turned around, I was done. So I didn't. I just ran. I bolted straight through the broken back door, the glass crunching under my sneakers. The cold hit me like a punch in the chest. I was only wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, but I didn't care. I ran through the backyard, slipping on the snow and almost falling twice. The neighbors on the left side had all their lights on. I sprinted toward their porch, screaming for help at the top of my lungs. But it was exactly midnight now. Fireworks were exploding everywhere. The sky was lit up with colors, and the noise was deafening. Nobody could hear a thing. I remember just hammering on the neighbor's door until they finally opened up. It was this older couple, and they looked absolutely terrified to see me standing there in my sweats just gasping for air. I probably sounded like a crazy person trying to explain the footprints in the glass. They eventually got me inside, and the wife brought me some tea. The cops arrived within 15 minutes and searched my house from top to bottom. Whoever it was had already fled. The only evidence left behind was the shattered glass and those muddy footprints. Nothing was stolen and nothing was disturbed. But the cops found something that still makes my skin crawl. One of the officers pointed out that the wet, muddy footprints leading into the hallway actually overlapped with a set of dry, dusty footprints that had been there for hours. It meant whoever it was hadn't just broken in when I heard the glass. They had been inside the house since before my roommates left, hiding somewhere in the dark, just waiting for the midnight fireworks so they could break the glass from the inside and make it look like a break-in while they made their move. I called my roommates and they came home right away, totally freaked out. My mom was worried sick when I told her the next day. She kept saying I should have just gone to the party. Maybe she was right. I moved out of that house a couple of months later. I just couldn't feel safe there anymore. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. I think about those footprints leading into the hallway, and that floorboard creaking right behind my head. I think about what would have happened if I had turned around instead of running, or if I had decided to investigate the hallway first. I try not to think about it too much, but every New Year's Eve when the fireworks start going off, I get this sick, sinking feeling in my stomach, and I always make sure I'm not alone. I've never been much of a New Year's person. The whole countdown and the forced excitement, the crowded rooms. It just isn't me. Even back when I was younger and everyone acted like staying in was some kind of a crime, I always felt like I was watching it from the outside. I'm from a small town in northern Ontario, not the kind of place people picture when they think Canada. It's not a postcard. It's long stretches of highway, trees that go on forever, and winter that feels like it has its own personality. When I was a kid, my older cousin Liam had this thing he did every New Year's Eve. While everyone else was drinking and making noise, he'd drive out to this little lookout off an old logging road and sit there until midnight. No fireworks, no party, just a thermos of coffee and whatever music he had burned onto a CD. He died in a crash a few years back. I won't get into it, but it messed me up. For a while, I tried to pretend New Year's wasn't happening at all. Then one year, I found myself out on that same road without really planning to be, and I sat there like he used to. It felt dumb and sentimental, but it also felt like the only way I knew to keep him from turning into a story other people told. So it turned into my thing. The last couple of years, my two best friends, Ethan and Rob, started coming with me. They're the kind of guys people assume can handle themselves. Both tall, broad-shouldered, the type who look like they should be splitting wood in a flannel ad. But we're not tough guys. We're just three friends from the middle of nowhere, trying to keep a tradition alive because it means something. That night, Ethan drove. He had an older Silverado that he babied like it was a family member. It was perfect for winter roads. Good tires, four-wheel drive, and just enough rust on the wheel wells to make it look like it belonged up there. We weren't going far, not technically, but not far means something different when you're talking about a town that's basically a gas station and a grocery store, and everything else is bush. We left around 10. The roads were empty, which I loved. There's something about driving on New Year's Eve when everyone else is inside. It feels like the whole world took a breath. The logging road that leads to the lookout isn't marked. You have to know where it is. It branches off the main highway and disappears into dense trees. In summer, it's dusty and rutted. In winter, it's hard-packed snow with ice underneath, and you can't tell what's road and what's ditch until you're already committed. Ethan took it slow. Rob was in the passenger seat, scrolling on his phone, complaining about how there was no signal out there, and asking why we couldn't do something normal for once. I was in the back, half listening, watching the headlights cut through the snow. We were maybe 15 minutes down the logging road when we saw the hazard lights. At first, I thought it was a snowmobile, But then the lights blinked again, and I realized it was a car sitting half off the road, angled like it had slid and gotten stuck. The hazards were flashing in that steady, patient way that makes you think someone is waiting for help. Ethan slowed right down and asked if we were seeing the same thing. Rob leaned forward, squinting, and said it looked like someone had gone into the ditch. We pulled up behind it, and Ethan stopped with enough room to back out if we needed to. The car was a small sedan, dark-colored, hard to tell what make. Snow was built up around the tires, and the front end was slightly nose down in the bank. The weird part was how quiet it was. No movement, no dome light, no engine sound. Just the hazards blinking and the wind pushing snow across the hood like it was trying to bury it. Then I saw something on the snow near the driver's door. A kid's mitten, small, bright blue. The kind with the little elastic around the wrist. It was sitting palm up like someone had dropped it in a hurry. My stomach tightened. I looked at Ethan, and he looked back at me. Rob's face changed too. All of us had the same thought at the same time. If there's a kid involved, you don't keep driving. Ethan put the truck in park but left it running. He said maybe they hit the ditch and walked to get help, but he didn't sound convinced. Rob started to open his door and said he'd check if someone was inside. I told him not to. It came out faster than I meant it to. Something about the scene felt staged, like the details didn't match. Rob looked back at me like I was being paranoid. He asked if I really thought someone would set up a scam all the way out there. I didn't have a clean answer. I just knew my brain was suddenly doing math. New Year's Eve, middle of nowhere, no movement, a mitten that practically screams for you to stop. Ethan grabbed his flashlight from the console and said we'd do it quick and stay together. We hopped out of the truck, and the cold hit my face like a literal slap. It wasn't just freezing. It had that sharp, dry bite that makes your nostrils stick together the second you inhale. The snow was just crunching and creaking under our boots as we walked up to it. Ethan walked up to the driver's window and shined his light inside. The car was totally empty. I'm talking nobody over the wheel, nobody in the passenger seat, no kid in the back. It was just a normal interior, cup holders, some old receipts, one of those cheap air fresheners hanging from the mirror. But the weirdest part was that there was no mess, no broken glass, no airbags, not even a scuff on the dash. If you slide into a snowbank hard enough to get stuck like that, you'd expect some kind of damage, but this car looked like it had been placed there perfectly. Rob tried the driver's door and it was locked tight. Ethan walked around to the front to see if there were any tracks heading into the woods, but the footprints he found were just wrong. There were way too many of them and they were too neat. It looked like people had been pacing around the car on purpose, back and forth, with no rush at all. And there were 0 tracks leading away down the road. It was like whoever was there had just vanished into thin air. I was just about to tell the guys we needed to get back in the truck and leave when I heard it from behind us. One single beep. It wasn't an accident or a long blast. It was just a quick, deliberate little sound like someone clearing their throat to get your attention. We all turned around. For a second, I thought Ethan had hit his lock button by mistake, but he was standing right there with the flashlight, and his keys were still in his pocket. No one was anywhere near the truck. Then, the driver's side door of Ethan's Silverado started to open, just really, really slowly. This guy stepped out from the shadows beside the truck. I hadn't seen him at all because he was decked out in dark winter gear, and he'd been standing in that perfect blind spot, where the headlights didn't reach. He had his hood up and his face half covered. When the hazards on the sedan flashed, I could see his eyes, and there was absolutely nothing frantic about him. He looked completely bored. He raised one hand, palm out, telling us not to move. In his other hand, he was holding something long and dark. My brain tried to make it something harmless at first, a shovel, a tire iron, anything else. But then he shifted it, and the shape clicked. It was a gun. Rob started swearing under his breath, and Ethan just stood there with the flashlight still pointed at the empty car, like his brain had just short-circuited. The guy spoke in this low, flat voice, telling us to put our keys, phones, and wallets on the hood of the sedan. He sounded like he was just giving instructions at a job he'd worked at for 10 years. Ethan started saying we didn't want any trouble. But the guy didn't even argue. He just repeated what he wanted. That calm in his voice was honestly the worst part. Then a second guy appeared near the passenger side of the truck. He was moving fast but controlled. He didn't have a gun out, but he kept one hand inside his jacket in a way that made it clear he didn't need to show it. We did exactly what they said. Ethan pulled his keys out slow, and we lined our stuff up on the hood like an offering. The second guy swept everything into a bag and backed away. Then the first guy nodded at that blue mitten on the snow and said something that shook my body completely. "Thanks for stopping. Most people don't these days." They'd put it there because they knew most decent people can't drive past a kid's lost mitten without feeling a pull on their conscience. They made us walk off the road into the trees with our hands on our heads. I remember stumbling through the snow, thinking that if I ran, there was nowhere to go anyway. We stopped when they told us to, and they ordered us to count to 200 without turning around. Standing there in the dark, listening to them start Ethan's truck and drive off, was the longest 2 minutes of my life. Once the sound of the engine finally died out, we stayed frozen for a bit. Ethan eventually reached under his collar and pulled out a second burner phone he'd tucked inside his jacket before we got out. I don't know if it was paranoia or just a lucky instinct, but I've never been so happy to see a screen light up. We hiked back to the road and Ethan eventually got enough of a signal to call 911. When the cops finally showed up, they did the usual stuff, took our statements, and checked the sedan. Till this day, Ethan's truck was never found, and they never caught those guys. Every New Year's Eve since then, I think about that logging road. I think about how quiet it was and how easy it was to pull 3 grown men off the road with one small blue mitten. And the thought that really sticks with me is that if we hadn't stopped, they would have just waited there for the next good person to come along. I don't think I'll ever truly move past the things that went down on New Year's Eve a few years ago. After I lost my parents and a few people close to me, I spiraled into a really deep depression that lasted for years, and I spent a long time going to therapy and trying just about everything to get my head right. It was a long, dark road, but meeting Dylan and this group of friends was honestly the thing that finally pulled me through it. They're basically my family now, so when they told me they wanted to hit this big bonfire party at a park across town for New Year's, I couldn't really say no. I'm 34, and even though Dylan and the rest of the group are a few years younger, our vibes just match perfectly, and considering of how much they've done for me, I wanted to be there with them. We left Dylan's place around 9:30 p.m. We did the usual, checked the windows, locked the back slider, and made sure the front deadbolt was set. We even left a couple of lamps on, so the house didn't look completely dark from the street. The party went way longer than we expected. By the time we actually got back to Dylan's, it was around 3 a.m. We were all exhausted, just ready to crash, but as soon as we pulled into the driveway, the mood shifted. The front door was sitting open, not wide open, but just unlatched enough that you could see the dark gap between the door and the frame. We all just sat in the car for a second. Nobody wanted to get out. We eventually walked up the path in a group. When we stepped inside, the place was a total disaster. Drawers were dumped out on the floor, the TV had been ripped off the mount and just smashed, and Dylan's laptop was snapped in half. It looked like someone had just gone on a rampage. We were standing in the living room, just staring at the mess and trying to figure out if we should call the cops right then, when Priya walked toward the kitchen to get her bag. Then she screamed. It was this high-pitched, terrified sound that just cut through the house. We all ran toward the kitchen, and that's when I saw him. This guy was wearing a dirty hoodie and a cheap plastic mask, and he had his arm clamped around Priya's neck. He was holding a long, rusted screwdriver right against her throat. He was shaking. He looked like he was on something, just totally erratic and twitchy. He started yelling at us to stay back, but his voice was cracking, like he might just snap and do it by accident. Priya was sobbing and Dylan was just holding his hands up, begging the guy to let her go. I remember my heart was thudding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The guy started demanding our car keys, but he was stumbling back toward the kitchen island, pulling Priya with him. Marco was slightly off to the side, near the pantry. He didn't do some tactical move. He just saw his friend in trouble and reacted. He grabbed a heavy cast iron skillet off the stove and just lunged. He tackled the guy from the side, and it was pure chaos. She managed to squirm away, but the guy started swinging that screwdriver like a maniac. It was messy. They hit the kitchen island hard, and I heard Marco yell out in pain. The guy managed to shove Marco off, scrambled to his feet, and bolted out the backslider into the woods. Dylan didn't even think about chasing him. We were all just huddled around Marco. The guy had caught him twice, once in the shoulder and once in the forearm. There was blood everywhere, mostly on the kitchen tiles and the white island. The cops showed up about 10 minutes later. They followed the tracks in the snow, but the guy had vanished into the tree line. They did find a bag he'd dropped near the back door, though. The most disturbing part wasn't what was in the bag. It was what the cops found out about the guy. He was just a local squatter who had been living in Dylan's crawlspace for weeks. He'd been coming up into the house whenever Dylan was at work, eating his food and even watching him sleep from the hallway. The robbery was just a cover-up, because he'd realized we were all leaving for the night and he wanted to destroy Dylan's stuff out of some weird, twisted spite. He didn't leave when we came home because he wasn't done playing in the house yet. He was literally just waiting in the pantry to see what we'd do when we saw the mess. Dylan couldn't even walk into the kitchen without shaking. I know people always talk about locking your doors and being careful, and yeah, we do that now, but it doesn't really fix the feeling. Now, I don't even take my shoes off until I've checked every vent and every floorboard, because I'm never going to be the last person to know there's someone else in the house ever again.